Good evening. My name is Bill Sheehan, and I am a volunteer with a Faith That Does Justice. Welcome to the inaugural community meeting by Zoom that we have conducted. We're very happy that you're here. Many of you in the area are aware that there is a storm going through, and that has affected the attendance by some of the people for this meeting, and including some of the panelists. But I think we have a very delightful program for you tonight, one that's very timely, and I think you will find quite interesting. I'd like to move now and welcome Father Peter Jives, who's a Jesuit, and he's the founder and director of A Faith That Does Justice. He has started this program, the Faith That Does Justice program in San Diego in 2015, moved it to Boston in 2016, and we've been here in operation since that time. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Father Peter Jives.
And yes, as Bill mentioned, I am a Jesuit priest and a physician that really runs a faith that directs A Faith That Does Justice. We're an interfaith organization that really seeks to raise consciousness about social issues that affect vulnerable people, and at the same time offer others an opportunity to walk in solidarity with people who may be suffering. And we do it in a number of ways. We really hold meetings like we're holding tonight, trying to raise awareness of issues that really affect people or that have an impact on many people, not just only here in Boston, but really throughout the country and quite possibly throughout the world. And we also run an action component, which is our ESOL program, English for Speakers of Other Languages. We invite recently arrived people who need language skills, and our intent there is through partnering with Jewish Vocational Service is really to bring language skills up to a level where we can then shift them into a more advanced program that JVS runs that helps recently arrived people get jobs at a higher level pay. There's a direct correlation, not surprisingly, with language skills and income in terms of the job market. So really by bringing people in and offering them language skills, we're really trying to help them and their families adapt as they enter into this culture with a better financial situation. So with that, we'll begin the program tonight, which we're really calling, faith in the national elections, and how faith either should or perhaps can inform our decision-making, political decision-making as we approach these national elections in now 1 month from yesterday, I believe. So as we begin, I'd like to really invite, we're very pleased to have with us tonight, Elizabeth Podre-Barak-Schupak, who's from the Pew Research Center. And Elizabeth, I think, is going to set the stage for us tonight by really offering some of their recent research data concerning this election and where different groups of people, different faith traditions are tending to coalesce. And by that, I mean, we have a Catholic population, a Jewish population. We have white Protestant, Black Protestant. And Elizabeth, I think, has some very interesting information. So let me introduce Elizabeth by saying she is the senior researcher or a senior researcher at the Pew Research Center, contributing to its domestic religion polls. Elizabeth holds a master's degree in international relations and conflict resolution from the George Washington University. She's a contributing author of many of the Pew Research Center reports, including Religion in Everyday Life, The Shifting Religious Identity of Latinos in the United States, and also a portrait of Jewish Americans. So with that, Elizabeth, you're most welcome, and we look forward to hearing what you might be able to say to kind of put this all in context. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to be able to offer some of Pew's data to kind of give a little bit of context to how faith voters are feeling about these candidates and kind of what they see as their top issues in this election. I'm going to share a few slides, so bear with me for just a minute, please. I believe I have this down, but give me 1 second. So these should be up now. Does this? What I would also like to say about these data is this is based on, or a lot of these are based on earlier polling that we've done. We do have some reports that are coming out, you know, in the next few days, next week or so, but these are kind of moving targets, so to speak. There's so much that happens in the lead up to an election that unless we were in the field every day, it's kind of hard to really get a handle on all of that day over day change. So please take all of this kind of in the time that it was taken, but know that a lot of these data reflect broader trends that we have seen that are relatively consistent with how people feel about this election. So this first slide right here talks about the presidential preference among religious voters. So what we're talking about is people who are registered to vote in each of these faith groups and how they are leaning toward, or how they would vote if the vote were held today. So overall, we see that Biden had kind of a slight lead at this point. So this is late July, early August polling. 53% of registered voters overall said that if the election were held today, they would vote for Joe Biden or lean toward voting for him, while 45% said the same about Donald Trump. But as we can see here, there are clear distinctions when we look at different religious groups. And this might not be too surprising if you've been kind of looking at some of these trends as to how these groups have voted over the years, but we see that white evangelical Protestants, for example, a pretty strong Republican voting bloc, the vast majority, 83%, said that they would vote for Trump, while just 16% said that they would vote for Biden. At the other end of the spectrum, you see that among Black Protestant registered voters, 92% say that they would vote for Joe Biden. And we kind of see these divisions, right? So we also see that white Protestants who are not evangelical and white Catholics, on balance, they are more likely to vote for Trump, while Hispanic Catholics, Jewish voters, and those who are religiously unaffiliated, they say that they are atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular, that on balance, they lean toward voting for Biden. But one of the things that I find particularly striking actually is what people tell us their vote means in a sense. And so what I mean by that is we ask people, if you were going to vote for Trump, if you were going to vote for Biden, are you saying that your vote is more a vote for Donald Trump or against Joe Biden? And if you're voting for Biden, is it more a vote for Biden or against Donald Trump? So maybe it's easier to explain if we look at an example here. White evangelical Protestants, 65% of them say that not only are they voting for Trump, but that vote is a vote for him. It is a positive support for Donald Trump, whereas just 17% say that their vote for Trump is actually a vote against Joe Biden. And you can see that, on balance here, Trump has a little bit more support in that sense, that these votes for him are votes for him. You see it among white Protestants who are not evangelical. You see it among Catholic voters that, these votes for him are a vote for him and not against Joe Biden. Whereas when we look at these votes for Biden, so if you look at the unaffiliated voters, for example, you see that a good chunk are saying that they are going to vote for Biden, but just 18% say that their vote for him is for him, as opposed to the 54% who say that their vote for Biden is a vote against Donald Trump. So people are really imbuing this vote with a certain value judgment on these candidates. And some of that might have to do with the fact that, we ask people how satisfied they are with these choices. And just a third or fewer of registered voters in each of these religious groups say that they are very satisfied with the candidates they have to choose from. You can see that, white evangelical Protestants are among the highest here when we look at the religious groups that we are able to analyze. So 32% of white evangelical Protestants say that they are very satisfied with the candidates that they have. But just 1 in 5 white Protestants who are not evangelical say the same, about a quarter of Catholics, and just 9% of religiously unaffiliated voters say that they are very satisfied with these choices. And then finally, I will wrap up in just a minute, and please bear with me. I know that this slide, there's a lot going on here. There are a lot of numbers. It's just a really big table, but I tried to highlight some of these key things that people are talking about as an issue that is very important to their vote in November. I will also give the caveat that this survey was done before Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away. You'll note that Supreme Court appointments are on here, and there is about 6 in 10 to 2/3 of each religious group say that Supreme Court appointments are very important to their vote in November, but that poll was conducted before Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed. But overall, what we're looking at right here is that there is a lot of consensus among religious groups, among registered voters in these religious groups, saying that the economy is very important, healthcare is very important. But you see a few more discrepancies when you look at some of these things, especially that have been in the news recently and that we are all living through right now. So the coronavirus outbreak, for example, 62% of all registered voters say that this outbreak is very important to how they vote in November. But you see spikes in that among Black Protestants, Hispanic Catholics, religiously unaffiliated voters. 7 in 10 or more in those groups say that the coronavirus outbreak is very important, compared with just 39% of white evangelical Protestants who say the same. Similarly, you see racial and ethnic inequality. You see that 90% of Black Protestant voters say that this is very important to their vote. About 2/3 of Hispanic Catholics say the same, 6 in 10 religiously unaffiliated voters, while far fewer white Catholics, white Protestants who are not evangelical, and white evangelical Protestants say the same. And you see very similar patterns on economic inequality, and abortion is one of the ones that always comes up as an issue priority for religious voters. We hear a lot of talk about kind of the pro-life vote, but when we look at how people rank these things in the surveys, we see that very few, maybe 4 in 10 or fewer, say that abortion is very important to their vote in November, with the exception of white evangelical Protestants, among whom 61% say it's very important. So there is a wide range of things that people are thinking about when they are casting their vote for a president, but it's all a matter of kind of how they rank them and how things change from here till November. So with that, I'll pass it back to you.
Is that it? Okay, well, thank you very much. I mean, it's really quite informative to see how you're able to kind of break down trends among the different faith traditions. And we do hope you will stay around. I think there are some questions that are already coming up, but I'm going to hold on them for a little bit. And I'd like to introduce then the panel. We have a very distinguished panel, and we're very grateful for those who are here today. I'm going to briefly introduce 4 people. I think we're still waiting on Jonathan Sarna, who is having trouble because of the storm, as far as I know, but I'm going to introduce him in case he does make it in here. But I'll start by a short introduction in alphabetical order. Ms. Tiziana Deering is the host of Radio Boston on WBUR. She's been a commentator and contributor to BUR for more than a decade and has contributed to a number of other regional and national news outlets. Tiziana was a professor at Boston College in the School of Social Work, where she taught social innovation and leadership. A longtime anti-poverty advocate, she is the first woman president of Catholic Charities in the Archdiocese of Boston. So we are very grateful for Tiziana's presence, and I think she brings really a wealth of experience in terms of the people that she sees on a day-to-day basis and is interviewing. Second, I'd like to introduce Reverend Bryan Hehir. Is the Parker Gilbert Montgomery Professor of the Practice of Religion and Public Life at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Bryan is also the Secretary of Health and Social Services on the staff of Cardinal Sean O'Malley in the Archdiocese of Boston. Bryan previously served on the faculty of Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and on the Harvard Divinity School faculty, including 3 years as the chair of the Divinity School's Executive Committee. And going back even further, Bryan served on the staff of the U.S. Catholic bishops, working on issues of foreign and domestic policy, including being the staff director of the Catholic bishops' pastoral letter on the challenge of peace in 1983. So Bryan, thank you very much for being with us. We look forward to hearing what you have to really share with us tonight. Third, I'd like to introduce Reverend Deborah Jackson. Reverend Jackson is the Director of Operation at All Girls Allowed, a faith-based nonprofit organization that is committed to restoring life, value, and dignity to women by providing resources that promote healing and wholeness. Deborah was formerly the Director of Lifelong Learning at the Yale Divinity School, and prior to that appointment, she was the Executive Director of the Ministers' Council of the American Baptist Churches in the United States, a prestigious and historic organization dedicated to the support of American Baptist clergy. And Deborah currently serves the historic People's Baptist Church in Boston, Massachusetts as the Minister of Worship. So Deborah, thank you also very much for being with us. And finally, we're hopeful that Jonathan Sarna will be with us.
I'm here.
He is here. Jonathan, welcome. Thank you for being here. So let me introduce Jonathan. Jonathan is the Joseph and Belle Braun Professor of American Jewish History and Director of the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies at Brandeis University. He is also past president of the Association for Jewish Studies and the chief historian of the National Museum of American Jewish History in Philadelphia. In 2004, Jonathan was named as one of America's 50 most influential American Jews and appointed chief historian for the 350th commemoration of the American Jewish community. He is recognized as a leading commentator on American Jewish history, religion, and life. So Jonathan, thank you as well for being here. So with that in mind, we'll move forward. I'd like to ask each of the panelists to give a very brief introductory statement. Perhaps if you, depending on your comfort level, really talking a little bit about your faith tradition and where you might give a general statement about tonight, and then we'll get into some specific questions. So Tiziana, I'd like to start with you if that is okay, and the floor is yours.
I'm a little unsure what to say. I feel like I am the one of these things that is not like the others because I'm the only non-clergy member on the panel. So what I thought I would actually do with my opening comments is just do a little bit of framing, because I recognize that I'm here as a woman from a faith tradition who has served in faith-based capacities, but now also represents the media. And I think that's kind of one of the hats that I'm to wear while we're here tonight. So just a couple of things. I am a woman of faith. It drives my desire to serve, and that in turn has driven the various professional choices that I've made over the years, because my faith also drives how I choose to serve. I say that because I also want to point out that our various professions have their own codes of ethics, their own professional standards and requirements. And one of the arts for me as a non-clergy member who has navigated my way through my faith tradition in a number of careers, in my professional responsibilities, I hold first and foremost to the codes of ethics and the professional standards of the work that I'm doing, whether that's teaching in social work or it's human services or now in journalism. And I think that hierarchy for those who are people of faith practicing in various professions is an important thing to have front and center when engaging in one of these conversations. The next piece of framing is I'd really like to comb out just a little bit the difference between the media and social media, because the former is the fourth estate and the latter is a set of distribution channels. And I think we too often confuse those two things or conflate them. And for purposes of our discussion tonight, I think it's important that we not do so. So there is a group of professions that are responsible with the stewarding of fair and free quality information, which is necessary for the functioning of democracy. I would say that's the media and journalism. And then you have a set of channels, and that could be social media, that is responsible for driving clicks, mining data, and producing ad revenue. Now, there are journalists and journalistic institutions that make better or worse use of social media. But I think it's important for this conversation not to conflate those two things. So then lastly, I think the last thing I'd like to say just in my opening statement is I believe that our faith is often what could, if we chose to allow it to bring us together across traditions, across principles, etc. But I think anytime we engage from a place of faith, it's really important that we recognize that doing so in a democratic environment, in a democracy, requires us to bring humility, intellectual curiosity, and a certain amount of critical thinking or healthy skepticism. And I would say that in my current chosen profession, we've done a very good job at the healthy skepticism when we meet faith at the intersection with democracy. But that this moment in this election requires us all to be very careful about engaging with humility, intellectual curiosity as well. And I think part of the challenge that we are in right now is the intersection of these channels, these social media channels that have a different set of incentives than that we have when we're an institution of democracy, and a level of certainty when it comes to certain faith practices that both we use to define how we are different from each other, and without a level of humility and intellectual curiosity that would allow us to effectively be in community together as a functioning democracy. So I think those would be just my opening framing comments for how I'm thinking about this conversation and the moment that we're in.
Thank you very much, Tiziana. That's really quite interesting. You do come from a distinct background in terms of media and really being able to, you're dealing with a lot of the public, and we look forward to hearing more. So Jonathan, may I ask you to kind of give us an opening statement, if you would?
Sure, and it's a pleasure to be here. One needed a little faith to make it after the lights went out. In any case, it's no secret that the Jewish community has voted in America Democratic really since 1928. It's a long tradition. And indeed, one can find in earlier days astonishing unanimity in the community. In 1964, when Barry Goldwater was the Republican, 90% of American Jews voted for Lyndon Johnson. Today, astonishing to imagine 90% of American Jews voting, agreeing on anything, but they all agreed that they didn't want to vote for Goldwater back then. In more recent years, there's been a sense that perhaps things are changing. I'll actually be surprised if the Pew numbers, which I think were based on a kind of small N, will hold up in this election. I'll be surprised if 37% vote Republican. In the last election, though, you did see growing split within the Jewish community where 29–30% voted Republican. In other words, kind of baseline Republicanism has tripled from the 1960s over the ensuing 40–50 years. And that is a sign of a community changing. At one time, it was common to argue, and it's extremely interesting, that Jews earned like the wealthiest Americans, but they voted like the poorest Americans. Their vote was quite similar in many elections to the African American vote, to the Hispanic vote. Still today, Jews are very different from others of their class, and it is perfectly clear that they don't just vote on the basis of class interest, but I think the divisions within the Jewish community, many of them rooted in religion, Reform Jews are more democratic, Orthodox Jews today are more Republican, but they remind us that self-interest which political scientists tell us determines people's vote. Self-interest can be defined in many different ways.
Okay, Jonathan, may I just stop you for a second? We want to hear more about this, but I'm going to just, in the interest of trying to get everyone in quickly, I'm going to just move on for a second and I'll get back to you. So Deborah, let me ask you to kind of give us an opening statement, if you would. We're very interested to hear what you might have to say.
Certainly, thank you. It's so good to be with you all, and I so appreciate the opportunity to share. And so I would open just to talk about the fact that as an African-American woman who grew up in the church, I mean, some of my earliest memories are that of the church. It is important to note and stress that African-American women are some of the most religiously adherent people in the United States, and those Pew Research surveys will bear that out. Of more than 83% of African-American women say that religion is so important to their lives and how it moves and in their well-being and their daily being. And so as I speak for myself as an American Baptist member of the clergy, I would have to note that my call and my work is very much motivated. I'm a Baptist, so that means we quote scripture. It's very motivated out of the gospel according to Luke, where Luke records Jesus's words coming from Isaiah 61, but in Luke chapter 4, Jesus says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." And I feel very much like that. He has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. That's our work as individuals, to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim the release of the captives, recover the sight of the blind, to let the oppressed go free and proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So that's the work that we all have to do. And as an African-American woman, I see that very much as my charge. But as a Baptist, I have to turn around and hold that lightly, because Baptists believe in freedoms. We believe in the biblical freedom that, you know, everyone has the right to interpret scripture as they see fit. We see soul freedom. That is, we don't impose our beliefs on anybody. We believe that churches are free. And then we believe in religious freedom, which means that you could have freedom have religion or not, and we're going to uphold your rights.
Wonderful.
So both of those are the tension that I hold, who I am as a individual and as a faith leader.
Okay, well, thank you. I mean, it's quite interesting, and I want to hear more. But let me finally get to Bryan, and Bryan, we want to hear you offer something to begin with, if you would, please. Could Bryan be on mute? We don't have him. If Bryan is apparently not hearing me, so what I'll do is, if he doesn't, oh, we got you?
Yeah. Right.
Okay, Bryan, please go ahead.
Hi, well, it's a delight to be on this panel. Delight to know that there is, I see 180 people. This is a very good exercise in democracy and a good example of how religion and politics is a pretty live topic in our time. So I obviously come from the Roman Catholic tradition as a member of that community and a priest in that community, and someone who's taught the social dimension of Catholic faith for 50 years. My way of expressing the approach to a question like faith and elections, or more broadly, faith and politics, is the following. In the Catholic tradition, faith is both deeply personal and essentially social. So it is obviously something that a person must accept freely into their life, but when they do, it opens up a conception that we are social by nature rather than by choice. That's what it is for human beings. And therefore, the social institutions of a society are of great religious and moral concern. The religious moral character of a society is fundamental to a good society. So the question is, how does faith relate to the political order? And I think there are two ways in which it does. There are some issues that are inherently religious, and there can be a direct transposition from religious conviction into the political order. Questions like religious freedom, for example, or protection of religious pluralism. But for the most part, I think I find the connection between religion and the political order mediated through moral vision and moral choice. Now, religion is the source of many people's conception of morally right and wrong. But in a pluralistic society, there are many people who have no conviction of a religious kind, but can be deeply moral in their conception of life. So my own way of thinking about this question is that there are some direct transpositions from religion into politics, but most are mediated through the moral quality of issues, domestic policy, foreign policy. Thirdly, in order to think about how that mediation takes place, I think it is necessary to take into consideration that we are a religiously pluralistic society in which religious freedom is guaranteed for each person and all communities. And therefore, when we make appeals about the moral content of domestic and foreign policy, when we do that, I think we have some obligation to do it in such a way that those who do not share our faith may find in moral wisdom that our faith produces a common ground to deal with issues of politics, domestic and national. Thank you.
Okay, that's very good, Bryan, and we'll hear, I think, more of the specifics as I ask some questions, but it's really quite a nice introduction. So to move into questions, as some of you may know, or our audience would certainly know, when they pre-registered, we often ask, what is it that you're hoping to get from this talk tonight? And we got a whole bunch of queries about different things we could ask, but probably the most commonly stated statement was this issue of single issue voting. And I would ask it this way, you know, should one's faith tradition lead her or him to act on an assessment of all values or issues, or is there a single issue that can take precedence over all other issues? And you know, that plays out in society, just very practically stated. You know, there are people, if I can use the words left and right, or conservative, progressive, on the progressive or left side, we may hear people say, well, I'm so concerned about environmental issues that if you don't vote that way, I'm not interested in you. And on the more conservative or right side, you might hear people talk about the right to life or the anti-abortion issue. So it's both sides, and there are people who will choose an issue and vote upon that and seemingly relegate other issues that may have value to a second tier. So I'd like to actually ask everyone, and maybe Bryan, given that you had just finished up in a general way, how might you discuss that from a Catholic tradition? We have you on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you, yes.
Okay. I don't think it's uniquely Catholic. I think in principle, one can say that you have to leave a person or even a community free to make a decision that they will give supreme priority an issue and everything else will be ranked under it. I think in principle, the freedom of religion and a democratic society makes that possible. You can think of extreme cases where that was particularly relevant. In Nazi Germany in the 1930s, I think there would have been a reason to be one issue when the Nazi Party was possibly about to assume power. However, if you ask me what the moral vision of Catholicism is, it runs against a single issue commitment. The moral vision of Catholicism is based on the dignity of the human person, the human rights which persons possess, and the way in which a society at the local, national, and global level protects human rights, promotes human dignity. And so in that sense, if you take the Catholic moral vision, while it's possible to be a one-issue person, I think it is not the model to be followed. The model to be followed is broader. It takes into consideration multiple issues and multiple levels of our relationships, namely how we relate locally, nationally, and how we relate from within this country to global issues. So is one issue voting possible? I think so. Is one issue voting advisable? I think not. Is one issue voting commanded by Catholic teaching? Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting. How about Jonathan? Would you be able to comment on that from your tradition or from your experience?
I think politicians frequently feel that particular groups are motivated by single issues. So in the case of Jews, they think if we strongly support Israel, the Jewish community will vote for us. When you actually ask members of that faith tradition, I think, as we saw with Elizabeth's presentation, it doesn't turn out that way. They give you a long list of items that are important to them, and it's easy to point to elections. This may be one of them, where a candidate makes a case, strong case, for the issue he believes will motivate all members, let's say, of the Jewish community, and then it turns out the Jewish community does not vote the way the candidate imagines. And then the candidate says, well, that's easy to understand. They're just bad Jews. But I do think it's important to realize that when you're dealing as a case of the Jewish community, a group that is both a faith tradition and a people, it is not surprising that a candidate who is seen to be antagonistic to that people or a danger to the homeland of that people is going to suffer at the polls. That's not surprising at all, but I don't think the evidence suggests that, at least in the case of Jews, single issue voting has really been central to their history. I think there are a series of values and a kind of belief system of what's best for America that has truly defined the way most Jews vote.
Very interesting. Thank you. And Deborah, how about from the Baptist tradition? What can you tell us?
From the Baptist tradition, there's no such thing as a single issue voter, because Baptists are really, truly all over the map and believe that there's a right to be all over the map. You might see more homogeneity if you focus on African-American Baptists, but even that is more speaking of the idea of the rights of all people, the human worth and dignity of all people. So the focus is really that on ensuring everyone has rights and that they're valued and treated with respect because they are made in the image of God.
Wonderful. And Tiziana, given your background, you're dealing with a lot of different people in your work currently, and what are you hearing, or how do you fall out with this?
So, you know, it's interesting. I've heard three words that I will pull out from other people's answers, and they sort of form a triangle of my answer. One is consideration, One is plurality and one is it's two words, human dignity. We're treated as one word for my triangle. And I think that is the set of boundaries around which we engage with this as lay people of faith in a pluralistic democracy. The core question is, to what and to whom do you owe your consideration? Your faith tradition will motivate you towards any of a number of potential issues. And some people feel very strongly that their faith tradition either motivates them to a single issue because of the teaching of their faith, or in some cases, and Father Hehir gave an example of this in his comments, because of some existential moment that trumps all others, lower t. Right? That trumps all others. And we do increasingly in a polarized America find people moving to these existential places that are in part motivated by their faith, in part motivated by their communities, the information that they receive, et cetera. The challenge is how to balance that sense that this is an existential choice that limits my aperture of what I think is important, against the fact that as a plurality and as a democracy, there are others to whom and other things to which we owe our consideration. And if we make a choice based on a single or what we perceive as a faith-based or an existential issue, and we do not consider the implications of that choice for other people's existential issues, then are we living up to our human dignity, our sense of the broader human dignity of our brothers and sisters, and our responsibilities to each other for that consideration? I hope that makes sense. It made sense in my head.
Very nice, very nice. Okay, so I'm going to move on to a different question off that topic, and I'd like to address this to both Tiziana and Deborah, that, you know, when we talk about politics and faith, in my own life experience, there are people who will say they're separate realms and don't mix one with the other. There are people who say, you know, my faith informs my politics informs my faith. And maybe stated another way is how, given that kind of where your context is of faith and politics or elections, there are people who will say people ultimately vote their pocketbooks. And on the other hand, there are people who will say, you know, they truly vote the common good. So I'm just wondering, maybe Deborah, why don't we, if I can ask you to first just chime in, this idea of faith politics, are they, can we unite them? Are they separate? And how are people voting? Is it fair to say that they're, you know, the goodness of human nature says we vote the common good, and you'll hear a lot of politicians say that ultimately people are voting their pocketbooks. So how do you fall out with that?
It's a great question. You know, I think even if it's not your pocketbooks, there is an aspiration or an aspect of self-serving or a self-serving nature that I think manifests itself in our votes. And whether that's we're voting because of our pocketbook or we're voting because we believe that a certain candidate will prioritize or privilege what's most important to us, be that healthcare or promotion of human rights. I think there's a lot of that. And the challenge, and I hope our faith traditions help to influence this, our challenge is to be able to help people see through the eyes and lens of their brothers and sisters. Because if we are going to have a just and equitable society, that means that those who have or those who are in power might have to concede power or give up something for the benefit of others. And that's not our natural tendency or proclivity. And we find too many are voting for whatever's best for them. And that often translates into a vote for their pocketbook, which is too often to the detriment of others.
Okay, very nice. And Tiziana, how about you? What are you hearing, or how would you put this together? This dichotomy between pocketbook and common good and politics, religion.
So a couple of things, and I really appreciated Reverend Jackson's comments, especially about these choices between the pocketbook, which I would argue is one way to talk about self-interest. versus the common good. And I would say a couple of things there. One thing about hosting a radio show where people call all the time is, make no mistakes, politics is about belief. Now, there are those for whom their beliefs are rooted in faith or their beliefs are rooted in a religious tradition, but everybody's politics are rooted in belief. Otherwise, we'd all vote the same. But we don't. And the reason that we don't is that we believe different core things about what our propositions and obligations are to each other, about what the hierarchy of things that are important are, et cetera. So I think it is a fallacy to believe that there is not an intersection between politics and belief, because there is, for sure. Now, that being said, the other thing is that this common good question, and I would use the word common good, but I'd also use the term social contract. I remember after Katrina in 2005, we saw a number of articles where people began, Michael Ignatieff being one of them, who was at Harvard at that time, beginning to write a series of articles saying, wait a minute, do we have the same sense of what the social contract is anymore? And in the absence of a shared sense of what the social contract is, what do we move towards? We move towards self-interest, because we have no shared contract of anything other than I got to get mine. Interestingly, in the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we're not a state, we're a commonwealth. Common good is actually baked as a concept into our state constitution. And there are a number of democratic documents around the country that do the same thing. So it is quite possible beyond faith or belief to be beholden to a common good. But if we don't regularly re-articulate what that means in terms of a social contract, our default will almost certainly be self-interest, unless some other set of moral principles are driving us to choices towards common good anyway. And then we substitute what those moral principles tell us the social contract is for whatever we have no longer got negotiated as a polity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, very nice, thank you. I'll switch again now. And Bryan, you had touched on this, and maybe I can get back to you and ask a couple of others in what I think your opening statement. The idea that, we live in a country right now, in a society that many would say, myself included, that we're in the midst of a big moral crisis. And, we have the whole issue of the COVID pandemic and how it's being handled. People are very critical of it. We also have the whole Black Lives Matter movement, where I think many people of European descent, white, have had their eyes opened in the past 6 months about what is really going on and what has been going on in this country for so long in terms of racial injustice. We have the immigration issue, where especially at our southern border, where people are really fleeing countries because of violence, poverty, and other reasons, and coming into difficult situations as they try to approach this country. We have climate change. We have poverty in general, which leaves so many people behind and out of the so many goods that this country has to offer. So it really brings up to me this idea of the moral imperative, a social contract, maybe as Tiziana was talking about. Would you like to weigh in on that? What does faith have to do, or where does it intersect? And I think you did touch on this to some extent with the moral imperative of social conditions. Do we have an obligation to look out for our neighbor at a level, and at what level?
Am I okay?
Yes, you're okay. Yes, please go ahead.
Well, again, let's start with a descriptive account. So are we polarized? One would have to be Rip Van Winkle to think we're not polarized. We are polarized empirically. It is the fact of the moment. Is that an unfortunate fact? It is very unfortunate fact, because it not only because of what that means for decision-making within the country, it also means that this country, which has more resources and more capability and is looked to in many ways globally, people now look at us and say they can't decide about their own society. Their role in the world must obviously be diminished substantially. So if you go back to my original statement, while empirically we are clearly polarized, what we try to do in this society, I think, is draw upon the resources of religious traditions combine them with a moral vision. I think that's the very important point. The way forward out of the polarization, I think, should focus on our capacity to create what I'd call a moral consensus. Now, a moral consensus does not mean we all have to agree on everything. And but it does mean that we all have some fundamental shared vision about what are the most important things to the welfare of this society. Now, even if you have that shared moral vision, which we do not have at this time, if you look at the Pew statistics, you don't have it within religious community. But even if you have that, then you've got to deal with the empirical reality. What divides us is not only our deepest convictions, but also our view of the empirical facts, whether it is what to do about racism, how to deal with poverty, how to deal with freedom and its limits. And so my sense is, descriptively, we are polarized, no question about it. Factually, that is a threatening reality to this country of 300 million people. It is important that there be some consensual vision. That consensual vision, I think, needs to have a moral content. It may not have a singular religious content, I don't think it will, but it could have a singular moral foundation. And then we would still have to debate the empirical complexity of how you relate moral principles to factual data in the society. Right now, since we are this polarized, it's hard to get the consensus. It's even hard to agree on the facts.
Okay, thank you very much. Deborah, how about from the Baptist tradition, particularly African-American Baptists? You're directly affected more so than perhaps white populations by all of these controversial situations that we're experiencing right now. What are you telling people? What are you hearing?
What I'm hearing primarily from African-American women, and it's interesting that there was just a story and locally about this on WBUR, that African-American women are exhausted, and that's the number one word that we use to talk about this time. It's exhausting because African-American women have historically been the caretakers, and I mean caretakers of everyone from enslavement. That was the role of the African-American woman. And so I find myself in so many conversations with particularly white people who kind of want me to be the educator or be the absolver or help them feel better about themselves, as opposed to dealing with the fact that maybe I'm feeling some sort of way, as they say right now. And so it's just a very difficult time. And, what do you say? We commiserate and we try to hold one another up. And then we say that we have to keep going. And keep going means that we continue to push for advocacy for everyone, for justice for everyone, to call out the hypocrisy of injustice when we see it, and try to encourage those who are feeling so enraged that there's no place for that to go, to try to channel it productively so that we can continue to be heard and ideally those demands met.
Okay, thank you very much. That's wonderful. And Jonathan, let me ask you too, from the Jewish community, I'll just add this too. When I was in San Diego, we had a rabbi come and talk with us about social justice and the Jewish people. And someone asked him, they said, Rabbi, why do Jewish people work for justice, social justice? And his response was, if a Jew doesn't work for social justice, he's not a Jew. And that was the way he came at it. So I want to just ask you, given all these issues, the Jewish people have been very good socially. And I'm just wondering if you can kind of offer some insight into what's going on there.
I don't write anybody out of the Jewish people, and of course, battles over the definition of social justice. What does it really mean? Have gone on for a long time. I think Reformed Jews absolutely believe that social justice, or in Hebrew, what they would call tikkun olam, is very basic to how they want to move forward. But Orthodox Jews, in some cases, might give you a different definition of social justice. And we've really seen that in the case of immigration. While I think a large majority of Jews who are themselves the children of immigrants are deeply sympathetic to immigrants, refugees, the importance of being welcoming to the stranger, easy to reach back into a tradition that teaches that, you nevertheless have people who, also drawing on history and on their view of what's best for the country, argue that one should not have immigration. It weakens the very country, say they, that we want to strengthen. And that's a good example of how two groups, both claiming to speak for justice and the common good, come to very, very different ideas of what that should be. That said, it's very important to recognize that in the 1950s, most of us believed that we should be somewhere in the center. We didn't want to be way out in the left because that had led people to communism, and we didn't want to be way out in the right. That should be fascism. And both candidates wanted to be in what was called the vital center. And here I agree with Bryan. It's very different today with polarization. The center has fallen out in America. That's why it's a perilous moment in many ways. And indeed, those who call for a middle ground will often find themselves attacked by both sides. And so we find both politicians and voters move to the right or to the left, with each side making the claim that they have a better sense of what the common good is.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonathan. I'll move to another question. Tiziana, here's one for you. Again, given the number of people that you're probably coming in contact with your radio show, a question that has come up when people pre-registered was, how do we foster civil discourse in a society that is so polarized? How do we begin to change it? Any thoughts or any suggestions from what you're hearing? Or
love. And I actually mean that, you know, so I'm in my fifth career. And in doing that, I feel like it may not give me the deepest look at all things, but I've certainly gotten a broad look. Sure. And I have come to believe that we have to normalize, professionalize, and destigmatize the concept of love. And coming to each other, coming into community with each other from a place of love is essential to finding common ground. And here I really will return to my Catholic roots around the concept that the true change of heart comes from encounter. When you encounter the other and the reality of their experience, that is when you begin to change your own heart. And only with the strength of being committed to acting lovingly does one have the ability to make oneself uncomfortable enough for true encounter. Mm-hmm. And in order to find a middle ground that is not, and this is complicated, because the middle and middle ground are different things. The middle can be moved by people who want to hold power. We can place the middle, drawing it anywhere we want, by people who want to hold power, and the middle shifts a lot as a result of that. Middle ground comes from a deep and sustained engagement in understanding others' wants and needs and developing together, as Father Hehir would use in his term moral vision, a shared moral vision of what that middle ground is. And I will tell you that in my years, and I won't tell you how many of them there are, but in my years, I have come to believe that unless we openly embrace a commitment to being loving, it will be extremely difficult to do that once again.
Very nice. Thank you very much, Tiziana. And Deborah, I'd like to ask you the same question. And really, obviously, you know, your congregation or the people that you're dealing with, African American for the most part, I suppose. And you know, who's suffering in this country from racism? It's people of color. Who's suffering more than others from COVID? It's people of color. Immigration, it's people of color. So we have a country that is so polarized. And from the downside of all this, do you have any vision or any hope as to how we can bridge the gap?
Well, I think that Ms. Deering said it perfectly. It is love. And, you know, Bishop Michael Curry was just speaking about this the other day. He has a new book on this aspect of love and getting back to that. But, you know, the specific term, you know, English doesn't have multiple definitions or multiple words to kind of decipher love, but it's that sense of agape, that I care about you and you care about me. It's that encountering one another, being willing to be courageously uncomfortable with one another so that I can see from your perspective and you can see from mine. And if we are willing to have that kind of vulnerability together in an agape kind of love, then it means that, you know, it covers the multitude of sins and ills and hardships. And I think that's a perfect example of people of color in general and African Americans in this country. You think about people who have historically been at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, the bottom of the pecking order, and still love this country, still want to be a part of this country. That's a story of people of color. That's a story of African Americans, because we want to be a part of this fabric. And we just need that reciprocated sometimes. That would be great. But we're in this. And I think we're in it because of this desire to extend agape.
Very nice. Thank you for that. Well, we've kind of come to the end of my questions as best I have them. And we have a couple that have come in. I'd like to ask one that's come to, again, in our polling of people, what they're looking for is the idea that how do we live faith in action, especially in a society now that is so polarized, in an election year and beyond. And I'd go back maybe to Tiziana. What do you have any suggestions? I mean, how do people, we can talk about it, we have to love, and how do we do it?
All right, I'm actually going to ask you to narrow that question for me a little bit. How do we do it in reference to the first Tuesday in November? How do we do it beyond the first Tuesday?
Well, I think it's both. How do we, you know, given that you know, we're in this, we're a month away from elections, and you know, is there anything? What can people do to become involved? But it obviously goes beyond November. I mean, you can answer it either way. But how do people live faith in action? You know, one thing, a faith that does justice tries to really drill into people the idea that, you know, adult faith is something that moves us beyond the church, the temple, the mosque, and it moves us into society where we live the values that we profess in society. So the question is, you know, people will say, well, what can I do? And one thing that we've really tried to foster is this ESOL program of giving people of privilege an opportunity to meet with and help the people who are learning language. I guess what I'm asking you is, do you have any other suggestions that you might offer people?
Yeah, I do. And I think this is a challenging and important question. And I think I would come from a position of whiteness in answering this particular question in this particular moment. Because I think what to do is very different in this moment depending on your race. And I think if you're white in this moment, your number one challenge is to seek better understanding of the history of systemic racism in our country and not ask anybody to make you feel okay with it. Read the books, have the conversations, visit communities, grapple with worrying that you're saying racist things because you don't know better, etc., and do all of it without asking anyone else to make you feel okay. Sit in the discomfort as a way to begin to shift the dialogue, who's got power, etc. And that's one very specific answer, but we are in a moment about race in our country. And as a white woman who is very aware of the complexities of the role white women have played, both in the nonprofit sector, in the service sector, and in our politics of criminalizing Black men, I think this is a moment, if you are white, to sit with discomfort and don't ask anybody to make you feel better as you begin a process of examination about the history of race in our country.
Okay, thank you, very nice. And Deborah, maybe I can go back to you, the idea that, from a perspective of an African-American woman, what might you suggest to particularly white men and women as to how do they live their faith in action that might have an effect upon the common good, which would include all the things we've mentioned?
Well, first you have to know that there was a amen corner even on mute as Tiziana answered her question. So thank you so much for that, because I think that that is absolutely critical. One of the challenges that, we see and you read about it in books like White Fragility, that when it gets hard, and in fact, there's a term for it of white women tears, that when it gets hard, that white women could cry and are so accustomed, because socialization has said that when white women cry, everybody's supposed to run to dry their tears and to be the sympathetic, empathetic support system. And we need you not to cry. We need white men not to get defensive, because then instead of being able to speak the hurt and the truth, now I'm coming off as angry or domineering, or all a host of other types of attributes, none of which are positive. I'm right there with you, Tiziana, in the 4th or 5th career change and not admitting to the number of years that are behind all those changes. And it's wearying to always have to be the best, always have to do more just to get the same level of consideration. And it'd be nice to be welcomed to the table without having to elbow my way into it all the time. And that would be just a real refreshment.
Okay, thank you very much. A question has come in that I'm going to try to paraphrase. It's a little long here, but, and Bryan, perhaps you would be the one to at least weigh in if you're willing. The question really says that politicians don't affect the Catholic Church in the sense of bishops, telling bishops what to do, but that the question here is that we have some bishops in this country who are coming out very strongly with political views. And I don't know if you have any advice on that. I know that Bishop McElroy from San Diego, and I'm sure you're aware of this, Bryan, in the spring, he gave a talk in San Diego on this idea of the freedom of conscience, to be able to choose from the Catholic position, as you had said, I think earlier, was usually the idea of really looking at a number of issues and being able to come to a consensus as to how someone would vote. But we have some bishops in this country seemingly telling people how to vote based on one issue. So I don't know if you'd like to mention anything about that for the viewers.
Sure. So let me distinguish what I understand the Catholic tradition is about how the leadership of the church should speak to its community in the conditions of American democracy, American pluralism, and maintaining Catholic identity in the midst of it. And so what I would say is my understanding is that the Catholic tradition tries to identify principles, a framework of moral, religious principles by which citizens, Catholic and others, can make equality. I think secondly, the principal questions. So I think the church, meaning the Catholic Church in this case, should articulate principles, should engage policies. I do not think that it's in the Catholic tradition in this country to tell people how to vote. And I think if you try to do that, whether they're Catholic or not, it is going to not succeed. And I think it is inappropriate to move from the level of principle and policy. And by policy, I mean what candidates say, what political parties say. You judge their policies, but you don't engage, I think, in telling people how to vote. I think it contradicts our understanding of the tradition, and I think it will fail always in the United States. Now, we're a big church, 25% of the country. We have a lot of bishops. I am not saying everybody in that community and every bishop is quite willing to agree with what I've said, but I think I stand solidly in the midst of the tradition when I talk about principles and policies, but not talk about specifically how people are to vote and not endorse candidates for any reason whatsoever. Again, from a judgment of prudence, it won't work. And at the level of principle, I think it is corrupting of the Catholic tradition within a democracy.
Okay, thank you. That is a question that's come up with a number of people, so I appreciate your clarification of that, at least from your perspective. I'm trying to see if we'll get any more questions, but if not, I'd like to kind of end with a, I'm sorry, did you want to say something, Jonathan?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to your question, which is so important about how we live faith in action. We heard wonderful answers, but I would have given a different answer.
Okay.
We live faith in action by going out and voting. And it is a time to act. It is a disgrace that only half of all Americans vote. And the voting record suggests that many Americans, I hear it from students, will argue, and I think Elizabeth said this, well, neither candidate really reflects my ideal. I'm going to sit it out. And I have to say, one of the things that was imbued into me, and many Jews, I think, had the same experience, perhaps because Jews were not allowed to vote in so many places, was how important it was to vote. My parents once took me in a blizzard. We have local elections in March in New England, and they wanted to make the point. You have to vote. It's an obligation of citizenship. And it seems to me, if we really want to live our faith in action, we will turn out, and we will turn out even if there are people who want to keep us away from the polls. And even if there are efforts made to prevent us from voting, we will insist. It is our right, it is our obligation, and it is the way we actually put our faith to work.
Okay, that's very interesting. You know, I think you mentioned 50%. I think I saw the last election, 2016, was about 56% roughly.
Yeah.
And people are predicting this could be a heavy turnout this time around. So we'll see. I don't know if Elizabeth is still with us, whether you have any information on the expected turnout this time, whether it's going to be heavy or not. I don't know if Elizabeth is.
I am
Okay,
still
good.
here. I've been listening with, you know, this has been a really wonderful presentation to listen to just from this end of it. I cannot actually speak to expected turnout. It's really, you know, we're not necessarily in the business of predicting the polls in any sense of it really. But I also am interested because we do know that a lot of these religious groups, especially, they don't necessarily turn up to vote in the same shares as they are represented in the population, and a lot of that turnout really can make a difference.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you.
Also, I would love to just add, I had the Secretary of the Commonwealth on the show last week. He talked about the fact that voter turnout in the Commonwealth was record-breaking in 2016 and expressed a belief that we will likely surpass those numbers this time.
Very interesting. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to try to end with one question, and I'm going to try to get you all in on this. About 2 weeks ago, David Brooks, an op-ed writer for the New York Times, he wrote a very interesting piece where he talked about that as society, US society, I'm sure it's true in Western Europe as well, but as it becomes increasingly secular, that he claims, you know, we run the risk of losing what he calls the metaphysic of all religions. And what he's talking about there is that if the young people stay away from institutional religion, certainly we're seeing that in the Catholic tradition, that younger people are tending to stay away. My bias would be that's true in other congregations. I'd be interested to hear people say. But he says if we lose that, what we're losing potentially is the basic story of these religions. And by that he means the idea, the stories may or may not be literally true. But what he's saying is that if the stories aren't told, the Jewish tradition, the Exodus, the Christian tradition of you know, Matthew 25, when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink, etc. He said those stories really create a culture. And if that culture is lost, he calls it about a loss of a moral ecology, that people will, the younger people, the younger generations will not have these faith-based stories that really allow them to base their lives or a moral structure coming out of the stories of the religion they profess. And I'd like to ask if we could all chime in briefly on that, it would be very interesting. So Deborah, let me start with you. From the Baptist tradition, number one, are you seeing decreased numbers and in the younger people?
Sure. I mean, mainline denominations, and every study, Pew's a great research study, will tell you that the mainline denominations are decreasing. So you do see that. However, I'm kind of a firm believer in what Phyllis Tickle wrote in her book, The Great Emergence, talking about the fact that every time we had one of these kind of epic kind of breakups in history where something shifted and something changed, where it looked like it would be the demise of the faith got bigger. And we're already seeing that as a microcosm in COVID. Churches whose daily or weekly attendance had declined are seeing record numbers of views on live streaming. So will the faith take different shapes? Maybe someone won't be able to quote scripture like, you know, good Baptists would say that they do. There is that seed that continues, and I believe that it will increase.
Okay, how about Jonathan, the Jewish tradition?
I could almost echo what Deborah said. Certainly, one has seen a great deal of nervousness that young people are much less interested in the synagogue than their parents and grandparents. And yet I too have a sense that we are seeing the sands shifting, and the seeds of a new revival have been planted by COVID. Thousands turned up at high holiday services. Just an article today about the astonishment really of rabbis who were afraid they would have no audience. The synagogues are closed, and yet they never had a larger audience. I think I would take it one step further. I think in the eyes of many, there has been a failure of government in the crisis that we are now experiencing. And in that failure of government, people are turning back to their rabbis, their ministers, their priests, who have done absolutely remarkable work in this time. Those are the people who have nurtured the ill, who have understood the fears, who have found ways, even when the churches and synagogues are closed, to bring the faithful together. They will be, I believe, the big winners from this crisis. And when we look back historically, this will be a turning point, even in the history of American religion.
Okay, thank you. How about Tiziana? What are you hearing or seeing?
I lament the fact that I am not up to the task of communicating what I want to in answer to this question. Okay, our faith tradition. So let us step outside for a moment of the idea that of ascribing to a particular faith tradition as the one true faith. Let's step out of that for a moment. Our faith traditions are a form of shared storytelling, shared history, collective narrative, collective identification of who we are. And we use it again, and I've referenced this a million times tonight, but that's the story of my life with Father Hehir. I will reference him 1,000,001 times. It gets us to our moral vision of who we are as a people. We may be, and I think what we are hearing when we do segments on religion, when we talk with listeners, et cetera, we certainly are hearing the same thing that you've just heard, which is that there is a return to our faith traditions as a result of the coronavirus. But I would exercise caution to us as well, that our world is telling us, our racial history is telling us, our gender history is telling us, our Western history is telling us that we are in dire need of rewriting some of our collective narrative of who we are, that we actually need to rewrite some of our story. And one of the things that we can begin to do intensely locally is literally start doing shared storytelling. We can bring our faith tradition into that shared storytelling. It guides our moral vision, but we better embrace the fact that it is time for an adjusted story. And that actually can be done. I know this from my work in radio. It can be done first through encounter on the local level, concerted shared storytelling efforts on the local level, where we draw from our faith traditions, but we begin to rewrite our moral vision of who we are for what comes next.
Okay, thank you. So Bryan, I give you the last word.
Okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I would take a column of the grid that Pew has given us over the last several years, and that's the group of people that say they're spiritual but not religious. Mm-hmm. And my understanding of that is that now tops over 16% of the country, has grown from about 9% when that question first took on. Rather than the question of decline within different traditions, because I think what one finds in that group is reflected within traditions among young people. They might not say, I have no connection with the tradition, but they're not necessarily practicing the tradition they're part of. But what I find in that spiritual but not religious is the seed that can grow into something larger, because that spiritual question can be opened to the moral question. And the moral question can drive one back, at least in many cases, to the religious tradition. And when we talk about this moment that we're in, this intersection of the last 8 months between COVID on the one hand and racial justice on the other, this intersection of these two things pose the deepest kinds of moral questions, because the pandemic has shown us in healthcare just how unequal healthcare is in this country, particularly to the African American community and the immigrant community. So my feeling is that look at that column about spiritual and not religious and ask, is there something there that can grow out of this spiritual connection that becomes deeper morally and religiously? And if that's true, that is also true for younger people within our traditions who will say, I'm not participating, but it doesn't mean I have no spiritual insight. And the moral justice questions may be the road into that insight.
Yeah, I agree with you, Brian. I think that's really, many young people will not come to church, synagogue, mosque, whatever. But if you ask them to get involved, to do something to help people, they will come out in droves. That's been our experience. So thank you. So with that, in the interest of time, trying to end at 8 o'clock, I want to thank our panel. Elizabeth, thank you so much. Jonathan, for your time. Tiziana, Deborah, wonderful to have you here, and Brian, yourself. We're very grateful. We've had I think a wonderful discussion. I think our audience is going to be very pleased, and we are grateful for it. I'd like to thank the audience for participating, being with us tonight. And I'd like to just say that for anyone who's interested in hearing tonight's discussion, it will be posted on our website, I think probably by tomorrow. So you can hear it there. You can let people know if they're interested. And I just want to finally make people aware of a couple of other events that we have coming up. On October 15th, we're initiating a reaching out to the Spanish-speaking community. We have Barbara Gutierrez, who's a nun of the Sisters of Notre Dame de l'Amour, Mexican by birth, and going to speak in Spanish to these people who have recently arrived with the idea of where is God in this pandemic for you? You can only imagine, I can only imagine that, our lives have been shut down to some extent. You can imagine someone recently arrived without good language skills who may not even be documented. These have to be very tough times for them. So we're trying to reach out and to establish a sense of community with them. On November 12th at 7 p.m., we're going to have, I don't know if some of you have heard, there's a Canadian sculptor, Timothy Smalls. He was featured in the National Catholic Reporter about a month ago, and he does sculptures in a modern context. For example, he has what he calls the homeless Jesus, and it's Jesus lying on a park bench as a homeless person. And the park bench is set up in a way where there's enough room for someone to sit next to the homeless Jesus. He had also one on the migration issue, a massive sculpture that was featured outside the Vatican recently that Pope Francis, I think, met with him about it. So he's going to be with us in a discussion, a virtual discussion that we'll have with him November 12th. If you're on our mailing list, which probably all of you are, our panel, and hopefully those who are watching tonight, you'll get a notice about it, and we'd welcome to join us then. I think it's going to be very interesting as he'll talk about what motivated him to do these and where is his creativity coming from. So again, I'll just remind you that you can be in touch with us through our webpage at www.faith-justice.org. We would welcome your feedback. We'd welcome you to be with us as we make this journey through these difficult times. And as Jonathan said, one parting gesture I'd say to everybody is, let's get out and vote. I think these are difficult times of crisis. And I think our voices, people of faith, our voices need to be heard. So I want to thank everyone for being here today, and our panel in particular, and be well, be safe. And I look forward to seeing you all in person as time will permit. So be well. Thank you so much.